may be around the world, and thank you for joining us once again on truth2u.org. That's truth number 2 letter u.org. I'm Jono, and joining me in the virtual Truth to You studio all the way from Ireland is Jason of Spiritualbabies.net. G'day, mate.
Good evening. Can you hear that?
I can hear. Like, oh, you mean can I hear the silence?
The sound of silence.
Oh, it's so sad, isn't it?
Yeah, poor old Mr. Squeaky met his demise early Friday morning.
He did. At your violent, evil hand.
Me, a stepladder, a screwdriver, which, considering it was hardwired, maybe not the best tool for the job. You know what the mystery is?
Do tell.
When I removed it from the ceiling, there was no battery in it.
Oh, no.
Who are you?
Dun, dun,
what was
dun.
that? I haven't even introduced you. You can't even talk yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm waiting.
All of a sudden, this mysterious voice out of nowhere. Press pause for a second there, Jason, all the way from Louisiana, to help us with Torah Pearls, Season 2 of Torah Pearls, because Rabbi Tobias Singer is in the jungles, deep in the jungles of Bali, swinging from tree to tree somewhere with a Torah scroll under his arm. Ross Nichols of rootsoffaith.org, rootsoffaith.org is the website, ancient truth for a modern world. Welcome back to the program, my friend.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I seem to be a second-string player, but I'm honored to be with you again.
You are never a second-string player, mate. It's wonderful to have you. And yes, you've joined us in the wake of Mr. Squeaky.
Man, so
yeah,
sad.
Well, you know, he made the world a better place for a short period of time, and then he buggered off. So that's all good.
Just in case this is the first program you've tuned into, boys and girls, Mr. Squeaky is, of course, what was he? The fire alarm.
Yeah, I like to think of him as the eternal voice that says, check your batteries.
He was the smoke detector in Jason's apartment, and every 40 seconds he would go like that.
Yeah, and to be fair, he's doing that for 5 years. That's no mean feat.
No, that's right. No, but we can put a positive twist on this. We can say that you gave life to Mr. Squeaky. Can't we say that? I mean, you restored his life.
That's true.
Because he was crying out for help to you as the higher power who could save him. You actually saved Mr. Squeaky, and you gave him new life. And you know, should he turn aside sometime in the future, I'm sure he'll begin to cry out to you again.
And at the given point, I shall hear his cry and restore him to his full self.
But you're telling me he didn't have a battery?
Yeah, it turns out there was no battery in there in the first place. Now, the mystery...
But what was he making all this noise for?
Well, the mystery is that it's understandable. The unit is supposed to beep if it doesn't have a battery in. That's what it's supposed to do. Or if the batteries run out. But what I don't remember doing is taking the battery out. There was a time when it didn't beep, then it started to beep, and at some point the battery just vanished. That I have no recollection of. Very odd.
Maybe it ascended. I don't know. That's a bit of a mystery. I'm going to let you... Anyway, now the reason why this happened, just to bring everybody up to speed, thank you to Sarah Sharkbait, who very, very kindly sent me some handmade soap. She makes the most awesome soap, the best soap I honestly can say, best soap I've ever used. She sent me a few different types of soaps that she makes, and the one I'm using at the moment is, get this, frankincense and myrrh. I feel like royalty when I use this, and it is so good.
To make you feel like a baby? Do you feel baby soft?
All I'm saying is really, really good. I'm going to put a link, in fact. I'm going to put a link on this post where people can get hold of some of this soap because, boy, it's really good. Now, Jason envied my soap, didn't you? You were green with envy.
No, I just want to say...
No, you envied my soap. No, you wanted my soap. You envied my soap. And then Sarah saw the opportunity, and because every time she listens to the program and Mr. Squeaky goes, then all of her dogs go, and it was getting to the point where she couldn't listen to us anymore, and she saw the opportunity. She jumped at the opportunity. She said, I'll tell you what, if you heal Mr. Squeaky, I will send you some soap. And Jason went, done! And so we've gone from Mr. Squeaky to Mr. Squeaky Clean.
Wow. Incredible pun.
Ross?
That is incredible. Yeah. What do I have to do to get a bar of soap?
I don't know. Do you have a smoke detector?
I do.
Go and pull the battery out.
I'll do it. I'm in.
Okay.
That's the only way.
I'm going to put a link on this post. Thank you, Sarah. Now, you know what? There's a whole, all I'm going to say is there's a whole lot of hotels in Jerusalem, or in fact, around Israel, that have smoke detectors that aren't going bloop, and maybe we can do something about that.
Yeah, maybe we can start a new movement.
We can start a new movement, and we can start in Tel Aviv, because that's where our tour starts. And maybe we can get everybody on board who's going to be on the tour with instructions saying, first thing you do when you get into your hotel room, remove the battery from the smoke detector.
Create a fire hazard.
In memory. Oh, yeah, no, we can't do that. Okay. Anyone who's listening, this is a joke.
We are not terrorists.
We're not terrorists. I was just going to say in memory of Mr. Squeaky. No, we are going to Israel. We're going to Israel. We're going to Israel with you and with Ross and with Tobias Singer. I can't wait. It's going to be a wonderful thing beginning on the 2nd of November this year, 2nd of November 2015. Only, 9 months away.
Yeah.
There's still room on the bus. All you need to do is go to truth2u.org, truth2u.org. You'll see Israel Tour. Just click on that and you can join us on the Tanakh Tour. Secure your place by leaving a deposit. Ross, are you excited?
I am so excited. Jason posted the other day this Left Behind graphic that I think a lot of people enjoyed. And it's interesting. We'll get into this in the Torah reading today, but it's so nice to know that in this week's Torah portion, Moses makes the comment about not even leaving one hoof behind. That's the way we ought to feel about this tour. We should want to bring everybody, not just the men, not just the women, not just the children. Bring your dogs, bring your animals. That's right. Load them up. Let's go.
We could do that. I'll speak to the tour company about that, but I'm very excited and I can't wait. It's going to be so exciting. Now we've got comments. Oh, we got quite a few comments. I'm just going to read a couple of them. Cara. G'day, Cara. Cara said, again, informative and spilling over with truth. Not only is your commentary of the portion clear, but also exciting to listen to week after week. I can't wait to tune in. Thank you, Cara. Thanks for the encouragement. Heather. G'day, Heather. Heather said, Jono, I have not experienced a plague of frogs, but soon I shall have a frog symphony because I have a pond in my pasture. I will record it and post it. I think it is beautiful. However, I would not want to experience a frog plague where they are in everything. I totally agree, Heather. But that's one of the things I love. Certain times of the year where it's, a lot more, it's wetter outside, it's moist, the grass is long, and the frogs, oh my goodness, hundreds, if not thousands of them, just all chime in at nighttime. And I love listening to the frogs at nighttime. It's a beautiful thing. But yeah, you don't want them in your kitchen. You don't want them in your cornflakes. You don't want them in your kneading bowls. Ugh. She also said, Jason, I love your skippy bits. What are your skippy bits again?
They're the bits where I talk about the bits that we skipped.
Yeah, good. So if I jump over something and you catch hold of it and go, we can't move on yet.
Yeah, because you skipped a bit. Yeah.
Yes, it's a skippy bit. She loves those bits.
Yeah.
And she said she appreciates us tremendously. Thank you, Heather. Okay, so this week we are in Bo, and I mean, Ross, this is an incredible highlight of the Torah.
Absolutely. It's in many ways, it's the beginning, if you will, the birth of a nation. It talks about the Passover, for one thing, the final departure from Egypt. But this particular portion represents the transition from the people of Israel being a slave of Pharaoh and his people to a servant of Hashem. So it's really a great pivotal point in Israelite history. So great is it that, according to Jeremiah 16, it is the thing whereby Yehovah is known. He went to make a name for himself. And so it's really, I'm excited about this Torah portion. I'm ready.
So I mentioned last week that flies, that's a plague that I have experienced, unfortunately. The 8th plague is locusts, and again, that is a plague that I have experienced. It says, now the Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his servants. And this is key, this is absolutely key, that I may show you these signs of mine before him, and that you may tell in the hearing of your sons and your sons' sons the mighty things which I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. And there it is. I mean, Ross, this is the reason why that these things are being done, so that Israel will be witness to this, so much so that it's something that they will tell their sons' sons, and it will continue on as it has to this very day.
Sure. And, one of the things that, this brings up a lot of questions. First of all, in the text, I think in most English translations, it says that he hardened his heart. The first thing you say is, wait a minute now, did Pharaoh really have a choice in this? Is it that his heart was hardened? I mean, is that fair? I mean, that brings up all sorts of questions. In Hebrew, it's from the root word kaved. He literally made his heart heavy. And, I'm reminded, if you go back to Exodus 9, if we can do that, just pick up a passage in verse 15. This is Jehovah speaking to Pharaoh, because now I could have put out my hand and struck you and your people with an epidemic, and you would have been obliterated from the land. In verse 16, and in fact, I established you for this very purpose, for the purpose of showing you my power, and in order to tell my name in all the earth. This thing is so interesting, because it's not only is Jehovah making a name for himself with the people of Israel, but with the neighboring people as well.
Jason.
I'm just reminded here of, we've got a group of people in Israel who have been in Egypt for a period of time, and we often look at it that they are they're kind of trapped. That everything was fine, and then the next day Pharaoh put up these watchtowers and had these guys walking around with shotguns and dogs and said, no, you can't leave. I think that there's a certain amount of comfort that Israel had within the walls, and that in this instance, God isn't just showing Egypt his might. He's showing Israel, or who will become Israel, the nation, his might, and saying, you think you might have it quite good here. I mean, later on, we're going to read they had homes, they had slaves, they had servants. I mean, these aren't people who were like the slaves that we're familiar with, from the slave ships of the 1800s. There's a different type of servitude that they had in Egypt. And here we have God saying, these things I am in charge of. Don't think that you're ever comfortable unless I allow you to be comfortable. And so I think there was a certain amount of that God said, this is going to really show you who your boss is. And what side of your bread is buttered.
I don't think we can underemphasize this point of Jehovah saying it's to make a name for himself. The phrase that occurs at the end of verse 2, Ani Jehovah, occurs 13 times in this Parsha, actually 8 times in this Torah portion and 5 times in the Haftarah. So this is really the idea. It's about making a name for Jehovah. And then the second point, you talk about how it mentions in this particular verse about talking in the ears of your son and your son's son. That's the whole point of this story. In Jewish tradition, we have the Haggadah, to tell the story. That's something that occurs over and over as well.
Well, God says in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 32 and on, for ask now concerning the days which are past, which were before you, since that day God created the man on the earth, and ask from one end of heaven to the other whether any great thing like this has happened, or anything like it has been heard. Did any people ever hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and live? Or did God ever try to go and take for himself a nation from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs, by wonders, by war, by a mighty hand, and by an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, according to all that the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord himself is God, and that there is none other beside him. And it goes on in that way, in order to obviously, as we read here, that it would be passed from father to son, from father to son, to father to son. That's why we have the testimony of national revelation today of this very event. And this is the reason, it seems, this is the reason why God is going to such an extent, such a display. And so Moses and Aaron, they go to Pharaoh, they give him the threat of locusts. They say, if you will not humble yourself before God, this is what's going to happen. And this is what I love in verse 7. Pharaoh's servants said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may go and serve Jehovah their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed? They say to Pharaoh.
Isn't that cool?
Jason?
Because Pharaoh, and again, you've got Pharaoh, who's this unique individual. He's kind of got control. He can do anything he wants. But everyone that's with him isn't getting their hearts strengthened by God. You know, they're not getting these kind of adrenaline rushes at the end of every conversation with Moses that makes them go, you know, damn it, don't you know who I am? They're there going, well, you know, maybe we should start listening. You know, I don't have any more. You know, my flour is all unusable now because of the dead frogs. And,
yeah.
My crops are all burning or drenched, and my cattle now are looking particularly unsteady. This might be a good reason and a good time to let him go. So I think it's interesting that we look at Pharaoh, but everyone else must have slightly been changing allegiance. Well, we see that later on, actually. But it's worth remembering that not everyone in Egypt was on Pharaoh's side.
No, well, clearly the tide is turning, right, Russ?
Absolutely. Yeah. When he says Egypt has perished, you know, they're saying, look around you. I mean, haven't we had
Wake
enough?
up.
Let's stop this. Get them out of here. Send them out. Yeah, they were ready.
So Pharaoh says, he said, so who exactly is going again? Just remind me, like he didn't know. Who are the ones who are going? Moses says, everyone's going, even our flocks and our herds. We all must go and hold a feast to the Lord. Then he said to them, the Lord better be with you when I let all of you go. Good heavens. He said, beware, for evil is ahead of you. Not so. Go now, you who are men, and serve the Lord. Whatever you desire, just the men. The men can go, and that was it. But of course, that's not good enough, and that's not what the Lord said, and that's not what Moses presented to Pharaoh. Therefore, Moses came out, stretched out his hand over Egypt, and the east wind brought the locusts. There was so many locusts, apparently, that they couldn't see the earth. Now, I've seen. Have you guys ever seen anything like that?
Nothing. No, not here.
It is spectacular. It is absolutely spectacular. So I remember once driving through country New South Wales, and the road was covered in locusts, and the road was a different color, and so was my windscreen, and the locusts move with the wind in this mesmerizing way. It's really captivating. Jason.
A couple of years ago, we were in Dallas, and we went to visit the Nesbitts, my friend the Nesbitts. And they had, apparently it happens all the time, it wasn't what I'd call a plague, but I couldn't see 4 or 5 square inches of ground that didn't have these huge, they were grasshoppers, but they were about 2.5 inches long, and it totally grossed me out. But they were on every moving thing with the hooks on their legs, and it was horrible. What I want to go back to is verse 9, and Moses said, we will go with our young and with our old and with our sons and with our daughters and with our flocks. Sorry, and then in the next part, what does it say in your translation again for verse 10?
He said to them, the Lord had better be with you when I let you and your little ones go. Beware, for evil is ahead of you. Not so. Go now, you who are men, and serve the Lord. And so it goes on. What have you got in 10?
Well, I've got, so the Lord be with you, and I will let you go, and your little ones. First of all, that's really a great indication here that Israel isn't just the men, it isn't just the women, it's the men, women, and the children. Everyone partakes in the feasts and the dedications within this nation. It's not one certain people, the children are always included. But in mine, it says, see that evil is before your face. And in my commentary, it gives the indication that Pharaoh thinks that Moses is up to something, that his face is, that he's lying. He's saying that I can see that you have evil planned, that this isn't the whole truth. I don't know, right. Ross, what you have.
What do you make of it, Ross?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. What it seems, and I'm no expert in Hebrew, but in my limited studies, the particular it's in the Jussif. So in Hebrew, it's saying almost with a cynicism. It's like, let it be so, like there's no chance that it could be. This is a footnote from Friedman's commentary. So my commentary agrees with your commentary, Jason, if that makes you feel any better. But it is, yeah. So it is almost, it's like tongue in cheek, go ahead and go. But he does suspect. See, all along, Shemot starts off with this idea. Pharaoh doesn't want them to leave. He's afraid that his servants are going to leave. Well, where does that put him? He's got a lot of buildings to make.
So in verse 16, after the locusts, and I mean the locusts eat everything. If it's green, they eat it. Even if it's made of plastic, if it's green, they'll eat it. So then the Lord called for Moses and Aaron in haste and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now, therefore, please forgive my sin only this once. Only this once? I mean, while you're at it, why not? But anyway, only this once. And entreat the Lord your God that he may take away from me this death only. Interesting. So he went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord, and the Lord turned a very strong east wind, which took the locusts away and blew them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the territories of Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go. And so here we are at the 9th plague, which is really, boy, this is such a bizarre thing to consider, but this is the plague of darkness. And then it says that the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand towards heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may even be felt, Ross, even be felt.
Yeah, that's really a strong image. You can almost feel it when you read it. You've seen it dark. I live out in the country away from the lights of the city, and sometimes the darkness has sort of got this heaviness about it. So that's the image that the Hebrew Bible is presenting. It's just so thick. It goes on to say that they didn't even move for 3 days. It's like they didn't even get up. They just laid there.
They must have been afraid to move because they had absolutely no sense of direction as to where they might be stepping. I know what it's like in the middle of the night. I'm also out in the country here. If I get up in the middle of the night and there's no moon, I can wave my hand in front of my face and just see absolutely nothing. And you've got to sort of walk around in circular steps to make sure that you aren't about to walk into something.
Yeah.
And have to be very careful. And that's obviously how they felt. And so they didn't go anywhere. Thick darkness is what it says for 3 days, Jason. 3 days. What do you reckon?
I'm reminded of in London, and I found it happens as well in Edinburgh. On some evenings, you get this kind of really thick fog. So there's a few. I was looking up instances of things that are like what happened here. And then actually one really interesting kind of scientific look at it. But there this famous thing in London of a pea super. And and sometimes when you have a large amount of dead and rotting and decaying stuff, it can imbue the air with this really heavy quality that you can kind of feel on your face. And it makes everything feel a little bit tactile and moist, and everything's a bit heavy. Mm-hmm. I imagine that at this point, most of Egypt was dead or dying, in as far as the kind of not so much all the livestock, but the kind of vegetable matter. Mm-hmm. And I wonder whether that had something to do with it. Certainly, there are times when I've been in Edinburgh, and you can literally feel, you can't see more than a foot in front of you in the fog. And you can feel that fog on your face, and it's kind of this tangible thing. Now, what is interesting is that this guy, Professor Mailer, a while ago, did a study on eclipses. And in 1925, in New York, there was an eclipse of the sun on January 24th, 1925, that was not visible in the lower half of New York City, 96th Street, marking the southern limit of the path in totality. And half of New York was in total darkness, and the other half wasn't. And
really?
Yeah, really. And this is there's only been a few instances when this has been recorded to such an extreme. But the guy then kind of traced back when the Exodus may have happened and found that there was a partial eclipse in this area. And it would have meant that Egypt was in total darkness, but Goshen wasn't. And there is a modern equivalent of that happening. I'm all for the possibility of science backing up the Tanakh.
Absolutely. Well, there's other theories as well, like it could be in regards to a massive volcanic explosion. I've read another theory about that, and that
a sandstorm.
The smoke plume may have extended over that direction and blocked out the sun. But even so, I mean, even a solar eclipse, there's still some sun. I mean, I've been outside in a total eclipse, and you can still there's still that sort of that rim around the edge of the moon there, and you still have some light.
Yeah.
I've also been in, that what you talk about, that really thick fog. I remember being in Blackheath in the top of the Blue Mountains. G'day to everybody there, just west of Sydney. And we lived there for a number of years, and there was a number of occasions where trying to drive home in this thing, and I drove past my house, I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 times over the space of the time that we lived there, just because I could not see, what was on the side of the road. I couldn't find any identifying markers. It was just that thick to drive. But even so, there was still a level of light. You just couldn't really see through it. So it's bizarre, and it makes one wonder, is this some sort of supernatural darkness, Ross? Is it some kind of supernatural darkness? Because we go on and we read that the children of Israel had light in their dwellings, but, in Egypt there, they did not. They just had darkness. And if it was some sort of supernatural darkness, the interesting thing about that, of course, is that those in Egypt would have absolutely no idea that they wouldn't be receiving any light from Goshen. They wouldn't know that it was light there. But if you were in Goshen, does that mean that looking back towards where there's darkness, there's just this big black void?
Well, it is when Jason described the fog settling in, it's like this real heavy darkness settling down. It's interesting because the Hebrew actually says in verse 23 that a man didn't even move from under it. The language there in Hebrew, it's the root word is takat. It's almost like it's coming from above and settling down like a blanket. So that's kind of the image of this darkness. So I would almost imagine, at least, that you could see from Goshen this darkness settling in.
Yeah, like an absolute void. My goodness. Anyhow, so Pharaoh called to Moses and said, okay, let's try this on. Go serve the Lord. Just leave the flocks here. Give me some sort of a win. I mean, I need something so that the people think that I've done something good. Just leave the flocks and the herds, and you and the little ones, you can go. But Moses said, you must give us sacrifices and burnt offerings that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock must go with us. Not a hoof, as you mentioned, Ross, not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must take some of them to serve the Lord our God. And even we do not know, he says, with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart and would not let him go. And then Pharaoh said to him, get away from me, take heed. Now, here's some key words. Take heed to yourself and see my face no more, for in the day that you see my face you shall die. And so Moses said, well, you have spoken well. I will never see your face again. Exit Moses. What do you make of that?
I think Pharaoh is reacting. He's always been very arrogant, but notice where Moses says, not only will we bring our animals in verse 25, he tells the Pharaoh, we're going to bring some of your animals. Not only are we bringing all of ours, we're bringing some of yours to kill. So then Pharaoh reacts to that. I think it even upsets him more. That's what I see.
Yeah, because he obviously knows he's in a losing situation. He just wants a win. He wants something to say that, well, at least I managed to do this. But of course, when Moses declines his offer or refuses to compromise, you're right. He loses it and he reacts. And this is what he says. And hence, here we are in chapter 11. Jason, what do you make of it?
I can't help but draw an allusion between Pharaoh saying that you will not see my face and live, and what we know about God. And we know that Pharaoh places himself in the position of a god, and I find it very interesting that he makes a similar comment to Moses.
That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. And it says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh. And, of course, this is the death of the firstborn. He says, speak now in the hearing of the people. Let every man ask his neighbor, every woman from her neighbor, articles of silver and gold. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. What do you reckon that means, Ross, gave favor? I mean, I don't know that the people are going, you know what, up to second thought, I really like those Hebrews. They're really nice people. I would like to give them some stuff. I think, I kind of feel like it would be more like, wow, those guys their God is actually really powerful and they're right. After all, it turns out that they are right. We better treat them well and we better placate them somehow. Let's give them our silver and gold. What do you reckon? What goes through your mind?
Well, the first thing that goes through my mind is this connects back to God's word to Avram. If you remember in Genesis 15, when he tells Avram in this dark vision about the future of his descendants being in a land not theirs and so forth. There's this passage in Genesis 15, verse 14. He says, I will judge the nation whom they'll serve as well, and after that they'll go out with much property. So it's almost, I wonder if they're somehow compelled to give, I
tell you what, if I was an Egyptian, I would feel compelled.
Take whatever you want
and just get out of here quickly before we're thoroughly destroyed. And so it goes on. It says, and the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. Then Moses said, thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn of the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who was behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the animals as well. Then there shall be such a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as was not like it before, nor shall it be again. Now, when I read that, I thought, it's interesting. There's been a lot of turmoil in Egypt lately that we've been able to witness, and we've seen the reports and on the news and whatnot. But apparently, the outcry that happened in Egypt here in the Passover would never be experienced again, it says. But against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue against man or beast, that you may know that the Lord does make a difference between the Egyptian and Israel. Jason.
The dog moves its tongue is a really cool idiom for it. Basically means that there won't be any harm that comes to those people. I want to go back to very quickly. So we're familiar with the concept that the plagues that came, many of them related to the deity of the Egyptians held to. So they related to the different gods. The Nile was a god, and the certain animals were gods. But when we think about the firstborn, we only really concentrate on the firstborn of Pharaoh and of the Egyptians. But it's the firstborn of all the animals too.
Right, yeah.
And a lot of those Egyptians will have got up. They deified those animals. It wasn't just a lamb. Many of the animals in Egypt were deified into gods. And so it would have been really aware to anyone that had a particular favorite. I mean, in Christianity and in certain, in Catholicism, you've got tons and tons of saints, and people tend to not really go towards Mary. They might be a fan of Stephen, or a fan of any number of other martyred people, and they'll stick to that. And I'm sure in Egypt it was the same. And they may have felt, well, at least my God wasn't attacked yet. I don't see my God being killed by this Israel. But every animal was affected. Every single deified being was affected. And I think that must have been a huge shock the next morning to see their dead God in the garden.
Really good point. And actually, I had to correct myself because at the end of chapter 10, I said that Moses left Pharaoh. Verse 8, at the end of chapter 11, after that I will go out. Then he went out from Pharaoh in great anger. So Moses went out from Pharaoh in great anger. So this was announced to Pharaoh. He said this before he left.
These meetings between Pharaoh and Moshe and Aaron are getting more and more confrontational. And Jason, you pointed out that these plagues were not only a blow against Pharaoh and against the people that were oppressing the Israelites, but it literally, in chapter 12, verse 12, I know we're going to get to that, but it is clearly stated there that these plagues are against the gods of Egypt.
Ross, chapter 12, it is the institution of Pesach. Would you take us through it?
Yeah, I think, the first thing to notice in chapter 12 is this is the beginning, as I stated earlier, of the birth of a nation, basically. He tells him in verse 1 and 2, this is going to be the head of the months to you. It will be literally reshone to you for months of the year. So the new year, according to the Hebrew calendar in the biblical Exodus story, begins. This is what we call the sacred calendar. It begins right there in the spring at the time of new life.
On the 10th of the month, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the house is too small for a lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take according to the number of persons, according to every man's need. You shall take make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You shall take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. And then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. Jason, you were saying something about this earlier.
Right, yeah. So we've got this instance where the slaying of this animal, this male young sheep or goat, happened right before nightfall. So we have this instance where the Passover offering is being slaughtered at the end of the day before nightfall. And this is the institution carrying on. So that when the temple times came, it was still killed at that period of time. So I was having a chat with our friend Rabbi Stuart Federer last week, and he was mentioning this, and I instantly thought, because of my tradition, the way I was brought up, of the crucifixion image of Jesus dying and the sky going dark and black. And whenever I see a huge event like that these days, I instantly wonder why that narrative was included in the text. And then it occurred to me that maybe this was a really smart way. I mean, for us growing up, when we read the crucifixion story, we know nothing about the temple offering. We don't know anything about Judaism. We don't know anything about the traditions and the culture of that religion. And we certainly wouldn't have any reason to expect the sky to go dark other than for it to have happened, as an event. But now when I look at this, I'm thinking, okay, so the people that gave this narration of the crucifixion knew that when the Passover lamb, which John wants you to think was Jesus, died, it had to be straight before it went dark. And so what do we get in the text? We get a period of darkness in the text after he died. For me, that was a very interesting correlation. Something I haven't explored. So that it may have been
added to the text in order that the scriptures may be fulfilled, if you like.
Possibly.
Yeah, and the gospel writers, since you opened up this can, Jason, thank you very much, is the writer, especially of John's gospel, is at a pain to show at every turn that there is a connection here between the Pesach, between the Passover sacrifice, and the death of Jesus of Nazareth. Every detail from not a bone was broken in John chapter 19, all of those connecting pieces, the fact that he's killed, in Hebrew it's Bein Ha'abarim, between the evenings. All these details add up. In fact, I wrote an article based on the New Testament, and it's called Was Christ the Passover, which I'll give you that link, Jono. But it goes into all of this. So your point is right. These writers are seeking to make a connection between the Lamb and Jesus of Nazareth.
And it's a difficult thing to do, obviously, in that we've just mentioned that the Lamb must be without blemish. And of course, putting aside the fact that Jesus was a human being and, human sacrifice is an abomination, he's not a lamb. And yet he was whipped and beaten, bloody as well, and with a crown of thorns and all sorts which is in the narrative. Therefore, he was not without blemish. I was having a conversation with a Christian recently about this, and they said, well, yes, but that's spiritually. You see, when it says he was without blemish, that means he was without sin. And yet, as you just mentioned, Ross, it does say in John that his bones were not broken, that it may be fulfilled that not one of his bones would be broken. Mm-hmm. So if it's good enough to fulfill a physical aspect of the Pesach, then why is it not good enough to have a unblemished sacrifice? And there's so much, as you say, Jason, there's so much about the Pesach which is not understood in Christianity in the tradition that we were brought up in. The very fact that, of course, the Pesach is not a sin sacrifice to begin with.
Right.
But we could get buried in this. Did anyone want to add anything to that before we jump off it?
Just one more.
Oh yeah, no,
go ahead, Jason.
So that's what happens when I say anyone. If I say anyone,
you go first, Ross. That's fine.
Okay, thanks. So when I think about this, there's also, especially in these messianic circles now, they really set out to teach the Seder and how it supposedly shows Jesus at every turn. But there's some problems when you try to do that, because if he's killed between the evenings, the Passover meal is not eaten until after. Think about it. You can't eat the lamb until you kill it, right? So he can't be partaking of a Passover Seder. The Gospels get confused on this because in one of the texts, it actually uses the word when he breaks the bread. The Greek word there, and I've learned this from previous years, I've forgotten more than I know now, but the bread, the word for bread there is leavened bread. So there's some problems with this association of Jesus and the Passover lamb. But your point is very, very, it's a big one when you say the Passover lamb had nothing at all to do with sin. It's just not there.
Jason.
There is a verse later on when we get to 12:22 that's worth exploring just a small bit on this subject. But what I want to remind people, especially if they are making a correlation between Jesus being this lamb and the lamb of Passover, is that the lamb of Passover was taken by the people of Israel and was slaughtered in their homes, and then later on as a community, and then later on at the temple. And it was not. So even if we take the crucifixion story and we say, okay, we're going to actually turn Jesus into a lamb, would it be biblically just to say that God would accept that offering outside of his holy city on top of a dung heap when sacrificed by a pagan culture? That for me just seems completely foreign. Why would God plan that this one-off sacrifice should be done by the Roman people? That is completely mind-boggling to me. When people don't, I never really thought about it. The Romans were just this part of the narrative. But why would God choose that to happen? It just, for me, it's completely foreign. But we can move on. It's worth thinking that, No,
hold on. I have one more point to make. Most Christians now associate Passover with the death of God's Son. Think about that. What is so powerful to me about Passover, and the point that cinches it, if you will, is that the one firstborn son that does not die at Passover is God's Son.
Amen.
Amen. Goes on to say, and they took some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts of the lintel of the houses where they ate. And really, is that not a way of saying to the Egyptians, check it out, look what we've done? Not only have we killed one of your gods, the representation of one of your gods, but we're going to rub it in your face. We're going to paint the blood on the doorpost because we're not scared of you guys.
Well, I think it's shocking. It's supposed to be shocking.
It's supposed to be shocking.
And it's part of this making a distinction. That phrase occurs in this Torah portion. I will make a distinction between my people and the people of Egypt. It goes back to what he told Moses in Exodus 4:21 through 23. That if you don't let my son, my firstborn, go, I will kill your firstborn. That's what he tells Moses to tell Pharaoh from the very beginning. And here he's coming true to his word.
And so you eat it with unleavened bread, bitter herbs, and you will not eat it raw, thank goodness, nor boiled, thank goodness, at all with water, but roasted in the fire. And but also with its head and its legs and its entrails. Interesting. You shall let none of it remain until morning. So whatever you don't eat, you burn up in the fire. And thus you shall eat it with your belts on your waist, with the sandals on your feet, with a staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover, for I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man, beast, and against all the gods, as you were saying, Ross, against all the gods of Egypt, I will execute judgment. I am Yehovah. Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and I will strike, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Now, when I read that again, that reminded me, there's quite a number of instances. For example, Cain. We could begin with Cain, Ross. He received a mark of protection from God. Also, it reminded me of Ezekiel chapter 9, the chap with the writer's kit who had to go out and put a mark on the forehead of everyone who mourned for the state of Jerusalem, and that was a mark of protection. And after that, those who went out with the sword slaughtered everybody without pity who did not have that mark. I suppose you could also say Rahab, who put a sign at her window so that she would not be destroyed in the downfall of Jericho. Can anyone think of any others, Ross? Can you think of one?
No, actually, I was listening closely to you. I was thinking that this blood being the sign, you mentioned the passage in Ezekiel where this mark is what prevents that person, if I'm not mistaken, from being punished. Here, it's the same. It's this blood will be a sign when he strikes. That's one thing. A lot of people think of this avenging angel going through doing the striking. But how many times in this Torah portion it clearly says that Jehovah himself will bring this destruction?
Yeah, that's so true. Jason?
I just wanted to skip back to verse 22. And again, it's a little bit of a New Testament tweak.
This is a skippy bit.
Yeah,
it is a skippy bit.
Yeah.
And you should take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin. So we hear about hyssop a few times. I don't know if you remember when we did our Hebrew Roots series.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about hyssop a little bit because it was mentioned in some parts and not in other parts. And do you remember it was the mixing of the kind of ingredients in Hebrews? There was a bunch of hyssop. Right. And there's kind of a mixture, and he talks about it being sprinkled onto the scroll and the people. Obviously, it doesn't happen, but that's what it
totally
says.
made up.
Yeah.
All right, it's just a little bit because because hyssop's there. Okay, so it's actually Hebrews chapter 9 verses 19 and on. It says, "Then when Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats with water," so calves' blood, goats' blood, and water, "scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, 'This is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you.'" If anyone can find Moses doing such a disgusting thing in that way, let me know, because I cannot find it. Clearly the writer of Hebrews just blatantly made this one up altogether. Jason?
So there's one other place, at least, where hyssop turns up in the New Testament. And it's on it's while Jesus is on the cross. And it's very interesting. So we've got 4 gospel accounts of Jesus being offered drink. Mm-hmm. So he's offered vinegar on the cross. What I want to go to first, though, is Psalm 51, verse 7, which says, "Purge me with hyssop, that I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow." Hyssop has a history and a connection to the purification of sin in the Tanakh text. Mm-hmm. So in Matthew 27:34, they offered him vinegar mixed with gall. He tasted it, he wouldn't drink it. In Mark 15:23, they gave him to drink wine mingled with myrrh, so that should have made it taste better, but he didn't drink it.
That's like Jono's soap.
It's like my soap. There you go, Sarah. We need one with wine and myrrh as well. I'll tell you what, that'd be an interesting soap. Anyway, keep going.
In Luke, the soldiers mocked him and offered him vinegar, and the text doesn't say whether he drank it or not. But in John, there was a vessel full of vinegar. This is John 19:29. A vessel full of vinegar. They filled a sponge with the vinegar, and they put upon it hyssop and put it in his mouth. And Jesus had therefore received the vinegar. So in this one, he did drink it. He said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. That's what it says. So it's very interesting that in the other 3 accounts, he either refuses it or doesn't drink it, or they doesn't say. But in John's, he does take it, and it's got this thing hyssop in it. And what made that particularly stand out to me when I was going through this is that if they had a sponge, they wouldn't have used the hyssop, because the hyssop was the tool for passing the liquid from one thing to another one. It was used as a paintbrush or a way of collecting liquid up. So I think John specifically put this hyssop in to show that there was a cleansing of sin about to happen, and that when Jesus touched that hyssop, that's when it was finished.
Interesting.
Well, hyssop is also, if you remember in Numbers chapter 19, it's associated with the burning of the heifer. You'll recall that they put cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet yarn thrown into the fire that's burning the heifer. So yes, it has to do with purification as well.
Interesting. Very curious. Personally, I would have taken the wine if I was in his situation.
Oh, yeah.
Give me that wine.
It's wine.
I want some more of that wine.
I was going to speaking of wine, I was thinking about the Passover Seder. And you just read in Exodus 12:11 how they're to eat this meal. Have you ever been through a Seder that's quick? I mean, this says, and you shall eat it like this.
Eat it in haste.
Your hips are you're ready to go, and you shall eat it in haste. That doesn't sound like the Passover Seders that I've been in.
No, but that's interesting, Ross, that you bring that up. Do you believe that is to be observed today post-Pesach? Is it to be observed in such a way that I guess we partake of it in remembrance of Pesach, of what was about to happen to them?
No, I think that's
yeah?
a good point. No, you bring up a good point because, I jest when I talk about eating the Passover Seder in haste, because now we are there to tell the story. And the story has to be told. It's the greatest story ever told. It's the greatest salvation that's ever happened. So when you think about what it takes to tell that story, quite frankly, it just takes a while. But I know that there are a lot of kids and grown-ups that are hungry by the time the meal hits,
Absolutely. So it goes on to say that this shall be a memorial to you. You shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. An everlasting ordinance is what I've got. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Following that, there you go. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. Whoever eats leaven shall, from the first day until the seventh, that person will be cut off from Israel. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation. On the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them. Oh, and that continues on to say that is an everlasting ordinance as well. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening.
Talk about unleavened bread for just a second. Have you had the crackers that they sell versus the real unleavened bread?
So, the square box of matzah.
Yeah, much different than the fresh big pieces of unleavened bread that you can get from the land or a nice bakery.
I make my own. I have it ready the day before, and it's good. It's like pizza base. It's tasty.
Yep.
Tiny makes her own too, and I do prefer I like them both. I like the homemade stuff, and I also like the big giant square crackers. But unleavened bread, there it is. Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Pick out and take lambs for yourself according to the families, and kill the Passover lamb. It shall be you shall take the hyssop, there it is, dip it in the blood in the basement, strike the lintel of the doorposts, and none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning, for Jehovah will pass through to strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel of the two doorposts, Jehovah will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer." Ross, this is what we have. Now it says not allow the destroyer to come into your house to strike you.
Yep, and I'm going to look at that. In the Hebrew, the word there is the destruction. So I don't think that it has to be like the image of, we picture this dark, foreboding presence, like an angel of darkness.
The angel of death.
Yeah, that's it, the angel of death. But I think there the word clearly can be the destruction, meaning that's what's coming. It's a bad deal, but it's not necessarily a personality like a demon or something, or an angel of death.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that translated as ruin a few times. I should love the ruin in. And I think that's an easier word to understand.
That makes more sense. And you shall observe this thing. And this thing is an ordinance for you and your sons forever. It will come to pass that when you come to the land in which Jehovah will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep this service. And it shall be, when your children say to you, "What do you mean by this service?" that you shall say, "It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our household." So the people bowed their heads and worshipped, and then the children of Israel went away and did so just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. Here is the 10th plague. And it came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon. Wow. And all the firstborn of the livestock. So Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. How about that?
Man,
unbelievable,
gruesome.
Then he gruesome. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Arise and go from among my people, both you and your children and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as you have said. Also take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and be gone." And Ross, also bless me, is what he says.
Yeah, it's interesting. He is so. Can you imagine what's going on in his kingdom? The cry, the shrill in his own house, not only in his own house, but in every house in the land. So he is so ready for him to leave, and he's a broken man. He's a different man at this point.
And so off they go. They get everyone ready to go. And, of course, before they go, they ask the Egyptians for silver and for articles of gold and clothing. And therefore, Jason, they plundered the Egyptians.
Apparently, they plundered the Egyptians. I want to ask a question first, though. In a Pharetic dynasty, and I'm just made that word up, I'm sure it's real, Pharetic dynasty, would not the pharaoh have been the firstborn?
I thought of the same thing. I don't know.
Well, there's an argument in Judaism that he was spared because he was the witness to this happening. You know, so what good is a dead enemy? I mean, there's this classic thing in Westerns, you know, you'd always let one go, so they could run off and tell the other villagers how bad you were. And then they would kind of leave when you were approaching. And in this instance, there's an argument that Pharaoh was spared to be that witness. So in 36, we see that it says that the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they would let them have what they asked for. Then there's an interpretation of this that renders they despoiled the Egyptians as they saved the Egyptians. And what's kind of interesting is if you look at the Hebrew word, it's only really mentioned in that way, with that context, twice in the text. And in one it says plundered, in one it says took. But if you look at the root word, it's actually to strip, plunder, or deliver, or to be delivered, or to snatch away. And the instances that is used in, there are some 200 of them, are delivered, preserved, rescued. So there's an argument that because God changed the hearts of the Egyptians to love Israel and Moses, and to give those things and to help them on their way, it actually saved Egypt and the inhabitants of Egypt from being vengeful and scornful at Israel leaving. Mm-hmm. You see that argument? That
is interesting. The Hebrew word there, I hadn't noticed that, but it clearly, the root word there is natsal, and it can mean to take away or deliver. So, you know, it's like the children of Egypt gave what they were asked for, and they delivered Egypt.
You're right. So now Egypt isn't having this stuff stolen from them. They're giving it freely. So when Israel is gone, Egypt is going to be there going, "Oh, those Israelites." They'll be like, we did a good thing today. And their hearts are lighter and it's all good. So I thought that was for a tiny verse, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, no, that's, wow. Then verse 37, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot. About 600,000 men on foot besides children, and obviously besides women. Ross, I guess, if they had, I don't know, 2 kids each, we're talking almost 2.5 million people. But at the beginning of Shemot, at the beginning of Exodus, it talks about how numerous they were, that they multiplied exceedingly, that they were swarming on the land. So I'm guessing they had more than just 2 children each. Some estimate that there would have been at least 3 million of them in total. What do you make of it?
No, I think you're right in that. If you go with the estimates, here we have about 600,000. The book of Bamidbar in Numbers, it says 603,550. So when you add in children, most estimates, if those are actually meant to be literal numbers, then you are looking at 2.5 million plus. There are some arguments that say that it doesn't necessarily mean that many individuals, but it might represent more of the word for clan or something like that. But either way, you're talking about a massive amount of people leaving, and not only are the Israelites in this multitude, but you have a mixed multitude that goes up with them.
True, that's true. And so they left in haste. They came out with the dough of the unleavened bread. The sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. There's some discrepancy there, isn't there? There are some theories. Is anyone familiar with this? There are some theories that the 430 years couldn't be the time that they were enslaved in Egypt, but in fact, Jason.
There's a few arguments. One is that that's the time from when Abraham received the prophecy of
in Genesis 15.
Right. So there's that's the span of time. I think there's also one involving Genesis 15, the period 15:13, the period of affliction. There's another one that says it starts from the time when Jacob was born. I'm just trying to pull it. I haven't got anything in front of me, but from the time that Jacob was born, from that period onwards.
No, I was trying to find quickly to see if I had references, and one of them says that the period of time, according to some texts, this is in my Jewish study Bible, that some start with the covenant of Genesis 15, as Jason says, or with the birth of Isaac, though that's not what our verse in this particular passage says. So, we might have to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, it's curious. In any case, it says, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the ordinance of the Passover, for no foreigner shall eat it, but every man's servant who is bought with money, when you have circumcised him, then he may eat it. A sojourner and a hired servant shall not eat it. In one house it shall be eaten. You shall not carry any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break one of its bones." And as you mentioned, Ross, John chapter 19, verse 36, that is cited as if to say that there's at least one stipulation of the Pesach that Jesus fulfilled. Very curious connection. It goes on in verse 47, "All the congregation of Israel shall keep it, and when a stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passovers to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it. He shall be as a native of the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat it. One law, one Torah shall be for the native born and for the stranger who dwells with you." Thus all the children of Israel did, and as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. And it came to pass on the very same day that the Lord brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their armies. But circumcision, Ross, your thoughts?
I was just hoping you would call on me, because that so many people, because of certain religious traditions, have said that circumcision, let's call it of the flesh for your audience, is not important. Some would say that it's not important at all, and yet here, very clearly, we are talking about a circumcision of the flesh as it was given in a covenant, as a sign of the covenant to Abraham. There's also this idea, people talk about, circumcision of the heart. Now, I have to draw back on my memory, but in Romans, I believe, Paul talks about that. And people think what does it say? One is not a Jew who is one outwardly, but one who is inwardly circumcised of the heart. Well, this is actually a Hebrew concept, circumcision of the heart. It's found in Deuteronomy 10, Deuteronomy 30, and Jeremiah chapter 4. So that is a good idea. It's a very biblical idea. But here we're not talking about circumcision of the heart. If you're not circumcised in the way that Abraham is told to circumcise, then you can't eat this meal.
To be honest, I was hoping we'd speed through this bit, because there are certain elements in these passages which, very touch-fiery and kind of cause fights. Especially when it comes down to the definitions of who is the sojourner, who is the alien, who are the people, who are the strangers. But when it comes to the circumcision, this was actually the thing that started making me look at the New Testament slightly off. I remember sitting at a Passover table talking about this with a group of people and thinking, I'm not circumcised. I just read that I can't have this. And no, that's not what it means. Well, no, I just read that, and that's exactly what it means. So how can I be part of this group that, the Messianic group? I mean, you assume that a Messianic group is a group of people that want to be part of the Messianic age, and I definitely, this is part of who Israel is, and at that point, I thought utterly. Before I studied this out properly, I thought utterly that didn't count. That this is all not important. It's very funny how you get the argument that the law is done away with, and then you get the argument the law is not done away with, but that doesn't include circumcision. Jono knows I got this done a couple of years ago, and only because of this I thought, it'd be hypocritical for me to sit down next Passover in any way, even as an observer to a group, and eat the meal if this hasn't happened. So if you're listening to this and you haven't had it done and it's been on your mind, it's really up to you. But read the text, see what it says, and don't paint on it. Just read the words. It's quite plain.
Yeah, let me add something to that, Jason. I grew up in the Christian tradition, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, while you guys were doing that, I went and got a New Testament off my shelf. In 1 Corinthians 7, Paul makes this rule in all his churches. Verse 18, was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision. Verse 19, for neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. It's almost like that's belittled. I mean, this is the sign of the covenant, and I think it's very important, and I've had people that have listened to my teaching in the past, and they've written me and said, look, I really want to know, should I go through with this? I'm a grown person. I'm this many years old. And I've always told them, if your desire is to follow the covenant, if your desire is to seek Hashem and go according to the commandments, then I see no way around it.
Moreover, Ross, I would add to that, it reminds me of a verse, Jeremiah chapter 9, verses 25. It says, Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will punish all who are circumcised with foreskin, is what it says. Now, in the New King James, it says, I will punish all those who are circumcised with the uncircumcised. But that's not what it says in the Hebrew. It says, I will punish all those who are circumcised with foreskin. It goes on to say, Egypt, Judah, Edom, the people of Ammon, Moab, and all who are in the furthest corners, who dwell in the wilderness, for all these nations are uncircumcised, and the house of Israel are uncircumcised in the heart. So clearly, from that passage, what God is looking for, and as you pointed out, Ross, circumcision of the heart is a Tanakh concept. We find it on a number of occasions throughout the Tanakh. And that is not just physical circumcision that God expects from us, but also circumcision of the heart. He expects both.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a beautiful concept when you think about it. The fact that it's in the Torah twice, I think it's very, very important for us to look at, when you think about this subject. So, yeah, circumcision of heart is important, but the covenant requires more than that, actually.
Verse chapter 13 is where we are. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine.
It's clearly about the firstborn. This whole thing about the Exodus and the Passover, when you think about it, Yehovah is there to save his firstborn son. So when he says that, the rest of the story, always right behind the scenes, is this idea about a consecrated firstborn.
But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb.
Yeah, because the donkey is an unclean animal.
There it is. Makes perfect sense. Verse 14, and so it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, What is this? That you shall say to him, By strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beasts. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all males that open the womb, but the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be a sign on your hand and frontlets between your eyes, for by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. Now, this is the verse that ends our Torah portion, but it's a controversial verse, certainly a curious one. It shall be a sign on your hand as frontlets between your eyes, this sign. Ross, what do you make of it?
That phrase is used 4 times in the Torah, in Exodus 13:9, in verse 16, and then there are 2 places in Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 8, and chapter 11, verse 18. So primarily from those passages in Deuteronomy, it says, you shall bind these, and that's where the tradition comes in of the phylacteries and so forth, or tefillin. But the idea, you have to say, it's interesting that the phrase is used in these 4 places. So have we taken something, this is the debate, have we taken something that's meant one way and literally put it into practice. I don't know that I know the answer to that, but it's clearly mentioned in those 4 places as something that deserves a closer look. I'm certain of that.
So is it figurative, or is it to be done physically and literally and physically? Are we to bind something on our hand, something between our eyes? Jason, what are your thoughts? You want to leave that one alone?
No. What I will say is that when I read the word sign, and it's really only become apparent to me in the last 6 months, when I read the word for a sign or as a sign or I will send a sign or there will be a sign, you can always see it. It's never a spiritual thing. It's always a thing. And so when I read this, these days, I mean, I didn't think this a year ago, but now when I say, and it should be for a sign on your hand, I have to think there's something physical that everyone else can see. And I don't know if an action would be that. I think that this probably was some sort of sign. As for the front that's between your eyes or in front of your eyes, I'm not so sure. I don't know. What I will say is that I do stand with my Jewish friends, and I'm wholly supportive of their expression of their faith. And, and they have a reason for doing what they do. When they're doing that is an expression of their faith and love for the Creator. And I think that's a beautiful, wonderful thing. And I'd never tell them not to do that.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, I totally agree.
And to your point, Jason, whatever this actually means, of course, Deuteronomy sounds like a more literal bind these on your hand and your forehead. To your point, though, it is meant to be a teaching tool to instruct. It's the answer to the question. That's Exodus 13:9, it's in the context. It's talking about keeping the 7 days of unleavened bread. And when your son asks you on that day, what is this about? It shall serve as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead, in order that the teaching of Yehovah may be in your mouth. So it's all about teaching. And so sometimes these physical things that we do are clearly meant to instruct those around us. That's the main point of a lot of the traditions, are meant to illustrate and teach and to bring that message to a new and young generation.
That is the end of our Torah portion. Thank you so much, my friends. Jason, Spiritual Babies of spiritualbabies.net. Ross Nichols of rootsoffaith.org. Rootsoffaith.org. Looking forward to being in the land with you guys very, very soon. Ross, just very quickly, tell us what's going on Roots of Faith. What can people find there?
If you go, obviously, we have our Saturday morning service. Jason actually joined us this last Shabbat, so it was wonderful to have him with us. But we do this every week at 10:30 Central Time. Every Saturday morning. I like to say that I preach Moses on Saturday mornings. So we teach a class. We have a lot going on. You gave the website. People are welcome to join in and find something that interests them. So
excellent. And Jason, spiritualbabies.net, what's the latest?
Yeah, I was just mentioned it during the show there. And I would encourage everyone to go over to Roots of Faith on the Shabbat. For me, it's already, at this time of the year, it's already the beginning of the next week, and it allowed me to stretch on my Shabbat for another 2 hours. And I would advise everyone to go over there. It was really great, and there's a really good community of people over there you can chat to in the chat room. It was a lot of fun. I'm just starting a new series with Rabbi Federo, and we're going through 31 inconsistencies in the Passion narrative, where we're looking at the events of the Passion narrative looked at from the 3 or 4 witnesses of the gospel, and we're comparing whether they make a conclusive argument, or it's kind of like you've seen a car crash, someone else saw the same car crash, someone else saw the same car crash. Are they good witnesses? Did that car crash really happen? Was there even a car? So that's what we will have up very soon. We recorded the first one last week, and that will be online this week.
That'll be great. There's something to look forward to. Next week, we are in Beshalach, Exodus chapter 13, verse 17 to chapter 17, verse 16. We hope that Rabbi Tobias Egan will serve us from the jungle somewhere between now and then. And in the meantime, dear listeners, be blessed and be set apart by the truth of our Father's word. Shalom.